Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. This question, this title, is not something that I made myself. Mona gave it to me, and I think actually it's a very good starting point for this discussion about making transparency possible. So I will discuss whether I consider OECD a friend or foe in the fight for transparency, and the reason why I do that is I have worked with the OECD quite a bit for the last, well, at least since 2011. I visited the place 4, 5, 6 times a year or so, and I also worked with different parts of the organization, competition, public procurement, and various integrity initiatives. What is the OECD? Those of you who have visited a place probably recognize these photos. The OECD is the Organization for Economic and Cooperation. Sorry, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I had to look at it. It was established in 1960 after the Marshall Plan in Europe, where there already was a collaboration on how to spend those money. It is an arena for discussion and collaboration, and I think over the last few years it has become the most, in my view, the most important international arena for such dialogue. The OECD develops policy tools, and they prepare the ground for political agreements that shape and harmonize institutions, markets, trade, and politics. The OECD has a secretariat consisting of very clever researchers. They have clever diplomats associated with the institution. They produce a lot of statistics every year, very useful statistics. They develop standards, for example, on safety, tax issues. And one thing that I think is very important is that they coordinate evaluation, so mutual evaluation of government systems, including on anti-corruption. And this is the mission stated here, to promote policies that will improve the economic and social well-being of people around the world. So why can we ask this question, is this a friend or foe of development? Well, by many, the OECD is seen as a club of the rich. It consists of 35 member countries, and these are all quite wealthy countries that are also scoring high on human development, on the Human Development Index. The OECD is now also serving as the secretariat for the G20. So that expands the group of countries, and it includes all the most powerful countries in the world. And what the OECD achieves, so as described, the OECD is an arena for dialogue and collaboration. And what it achieves, of course, depends on what the member want to achieve. So what the OECD achieves depends very much on governments' incentives to work for development and for international development. And these are actually two different things. Because governments, they have their voters in their own country, they have their companies, they have their responsibilities in their home countries. And sometimes their incentives to work for the greater good, international development, will not be the steps they have to make to work for international development are not necessarily the same as those that they need to make to promote development at home. They can say it in speeches and so on, but that's not necessarily the case. There can be competition for resources, energy, water, and so on, but this is also about cultural expansion. For many reasons, government wants to promote and secure benefits for their country, and sometimes at the cost of international development. That's a fact. Even if we all would benefit from international development in the longer run. But politicians also, of course, they have a shorter run perspective. They want to please the voters at home. So the result is that we see many spoken commitments, and they have to be compared against the results on the ground. So in order to understand what the OECD achieves and what governments achieve, we have to consider what are the tools and what do they deliver on the ground. And that's what I want to discuss on 3 areas which are particularly relevant for this debate. So let's consider anti-corruption, which is the area where I work most. The OECD is known for many very important anti-corruption initiatives. They have the Anti-Foreign Bribery Convention, which makes it illegal you can be held responsible at home for bribes paid abroad. And they have many other initiatives as well on public procurement, integrity, in so many different ways. They have a huge set of anti-corruption tools and policies, and these tools really it influences the way governments work on anti-corruption, and it also influences firms. And in many of when they develop these tools, in all their initiatives, they have meetings where they invite civil society, and they also collaborate closely. They have dialogue with people from countries outside the member groups. So there's an impressive toolkit coming from the OECD on anti-corruption. However, and also when it comes to the spoken commitments, I want to share with you this the result of the G20 work in 2014. I was a bit part of this process where the OECD and the World Bank worked together with the G20, and they came to an agreement about certain principles on anti-corruption, what they call the G20 high-level principles on corruption and growth. It took a lot of time, and I was part of these meetings, and many of the countries, there was significant resistance against this principle, but eventually they made them, and this, I don't want to read all of this, but you can see these agreements lists all the most important ways that corruption harms development. If you look through these, it is about citizens' confidence in government, of course, the rule of law. It's about how it is a cost for business, access to services by the poor. It discourages foreign investment, reduces healthy competition, distorts decision-making at the highest level, and so on and so on. It's all in there. This is something that they all agreed to accept. And they also stated that they endorsed these principles and reaffirmed the importance of acting collectively to combat corruption as a vital part of the broader G20 growth agenda. So there's nothing wrong with their spoken commitments. They have made this agreement. In practice, however, I have studied this OECD anti-bribery group. They have a working group where all the countries that signed the OECD convention come together, and the prosecutors come together, people with experience on the prosecutions, and so on, they come together, and they have, as part of that work, they organize evaluations of how countries perform in their anti-corruption work. And it's not only about foreign bribery, it's also about how their whole law enforcement system functions. And what we see, because I have read these reports, and what we see is that, well, the convention, the OECD convention, when it is implemented at the country level, many of the countries have complicated the law a bit. For example, some countries say that, oh, it's not enough just to pay a bribe abroad. The person who pays the bribe has to be in the country when they pay the bribe. So they add conditions that have to be in place for this law to work. Another such condition could be that a dual criminality condition, that the bribery, it has to be illegal in both the home country and the country where it is paid, and so on. There are many examples of how the law and how the terms are interpreted a bit differently than what they had agreed when they made a convention. And what we see in practice is that, well, around half the countries that have signed and implemented the law has never prosecuted one single company for bribes abroad. So that is the fact. And when it comes to investigation, even the richest OECD countries cannot afford the resources it takes to enforce these laws. And even we heard from the leader of the Norwegian prosecuting authority for these kind of cases, who said that we cannot, it takes even travel expenses, interpretation, and so on. It's just small. What should have been a small part of the budget is actually a very big problem. They cannot afford to take on new big cases because it is so expensive. So a politician can say that yes, we have zero tolerance against corruption, but they don't allocate the resources that are needed for the job. So corruption is a complex form of crime, and it really takes a lot of competence, resources, and independence. All of these have to be in place to prosecute these cases. But even in the Nordic richest countries, these resources are not allocated as they should. When it comes to the prosecution, we know that criminal law is developed for individuals committing crime, and it's extremely difficult to hold corporations liable. There has to be a crime. We have to identify the guilty. We have to those responsible. And so it's one way we have to say that somebody acted in a way that they can be blamed for. And then and the prosecution in these cases is very, very difficult. And what we see now is that in most cases against firms there are settlements. And this is a very this is a big topic, because this is actually a bargain between the companies and the prosecuting authorities. And the rules on this topic, they go in all different directions. In many countries, we don't have clear principles for how these settlements, how we should come to these settlements. And what we see also in the United States, where we have quite predictable rules, is that some companies can, in this bargain, they can reduce their penalty on the basis of what they promise to do in the future in terms of compliance and external monitoring and so on. So this is an area that journalists should be very aware of. And when it comes to court processes, when these cases end up in court, there are often appeal cases. The companies, they have more resources, they have huge resources, and they can let these cases go on for years. And with a limit on the statute of limitations, providing a limit for how long the cases can go on in the court system, many of those who are accused of corruption are left. They are not actually prosecuted because it has taken too long in the court system. So there are severe weaknesses. And I have to go on. So there are country evaluations on the law enforcement system in most countries, not only in the OECD countries, but there is significant amount of information about the law enforcement systems. When it comes to taxation, I had to go a bit quicker, I informed about. The OECD has a model tax convention from 1963. That has been important for securing harmonization and making tax systems that function in countries. However, it has resulted in more than 3,000 tax bilateral treaties, and it has also been seen as quite unfair because it worked best between similar countries with similar income levels. Financial Action Task Force, that you know, eventually they've started to have a real function, but their country assessments of the financial system reveal great shortcomings. When it comes to, when it comes to the principles for beneficial ownership, the OECD has contributed to very important steps toward a better system. It is easier to get information, but it's still possible to hide ownership. In all countries in the world, a minister can own a company in the industry that she regulates, and no one is able to tell. That's possible all over the world still, even with these very good initiatives. It has become easier to get information about financial account information. It's more available than it was just a few years ago. However, very much of this information is still self-certified, self-reported in that sense. And even if banks are supposed to do due diligence on who is actually the beneficial owner and so on, it's not necessarily, the facts are not necessarily available. And also I could go on. I think I have to move on because I have how many minutes? 7 minutes, okay. The point of this is to show that the OECD has very important initiatives when it comes to taxation and the tax systems, but there are problems in practice, and they don't deliver the guarantee that we need for transparency. And as we heard from the first presenter, there are significant weaknesses in terms of controlling whether the information is correct. So the OECD has contributed importantly to develop better systems, but it's not, we cannot rely on the information. And another problem that I just want to point out is that when it comes to initiatives for preventing tax avoidance and evasion, it seems that in these cases, it seems like countries end up with a letter of law interpretation in many of the cases, which means that many of the players act as if they are innocent, not only they act as if they are innocent if they cannot be held liable. So between what's strictly legal and what's strictly illegal, there is a big gray zone. And that gray zone is pushed to one side in the sense that if they cannot be held liable, it is okay. And for many of these forms of crime, they cannot be held liable. When it comes to the political level, the OECD has contributed with a number of initiatives for budget transparency, open government, open and inclusive policy making, and many initiatives on how to include civil society and so on. So there's no lack of reports on how to make politics more transparent. That comes from the OECD. However, when we look at what the Transparency International found, when they did these national integrity studies all over Europe, including, I think, most of the OECD members have done these kind of national integrity studies, where they study the function of the rules, how good are the rules, and how do they function in practice. When the Transparency International compared this, and now I'm quoting Kobus de Zwart, who is here. I don't recall exactly the wording, I couldn't find the phrase. But I can't remember either. But in the report, where they compared the national integrity studies all over Europe, Transparency International found that it is at the top level that integrity barriers are the weakest. So even if we have all these very good tools coming from the OECD on how to secure transparency and integrity in politics, what we also see, and this is also coming from the Transparency International, there's a very low trust in government institutions, a very low trust in political systems. So yes, conclusion, OECD is in my view, it is a friend of development. It is an important arena for dialogue on how to make better systems and tools. Absolutely, not a second in doubt. But it is a question. The question we have to deal with is how can we address the shortcomings? We cannot rely on the OECD to solve the problems we are discussing at this conference. But we have to consider how can we address the shortcomings. And on that matter, I think it is extremely important to demand more assessments on how governments perform. One of the things I like with the OECD, as mentioned in the beginning, is the way they organize these evaluations, mutual evaluations, where they assess the government systems in a very critical way. These reports are better than what we see from Greco, for example, or from the UN. And they share the information. I think it is important that we consider those who buy, vote, and invest, and especially in that respect, I think it's important that employers consider where they work and so on, so it's not only about investing money, but also time. But the role of labor unions, that's one of the things I'm curious about. Will they be able to function as, to coordinate all the different voices that will need some coordination to make a difference? And I'm also curious to see the role of sovereign wealth funds, including the Norwegian pension fund, how it will use, whether it will use its power to influence politics and firms. I think it is another interesting debate is whether we should place more liability on those in position to know and act, including the question of more liability on those who facilitate tax evasion and avoidance, as we discussed yesterday. There are many interesting debates because there is a trade-off. If we place too much liability on individuals, they will easily become scapegoats. Another thing that I'm very concerned about is the institutional landscape for law enforcement. I think it is a problem that, for example, in the European countries, we operate with different law enforcement institutions, competition authority, financial oversight, tax authorities, and so on. And they have, each of them have a narrow mandate. And I'm afraid that in the biggest complex economic crime cases, the problem gets lost between the different law enforcement institutions because they do not cooperate well together. And that's a problem, including in Norway. And then finally, of course, we have to support, fund, and praise civil society and investigative journalism. Thank you very much.